Welcome to final discussion. What is the overall message the author is trying to give the reader?
So in Fahrenheit, Ray Bradbury kind of had a specific intention when writing this book. He wanted to warn people about the potential problems with technology and how, when taken too far, it can contribute to many negative things such as censorship, tracking of people, and lack of deep reflection caused by the temporary, gratifying, and exciting activities that happen because of technology. It also demonstrates how, with an increase in technology, it is easier to manipulate people with the constant seashell radio in their ears. While many people think this was written for it with the intention of bringing light to the idea of censorship and propaganda, the intention of the book was to warn humanity about potential dangers of like technology, and these are other themes kind of like stem from the over reliance of technology in the society.
That's pretty interesting. So like one of the central themes of like the Man in the High Castle is like the interpretation of like the truth versus like misinterpretation of the truth. Like for example, like one of the characters, Robert Childen, he sells like American antiques. And the majority of like his items are like in his shop are like counterfeit items, and like he's very much like aware of this, and he becomes like very consumed by the fear that like all of his merchandise like might be counterfeit or whatever. And in reality, like the people purchasing his items have no idea whether or not the items that like they are buying are like actually real or not, and they don't really particularly care, I'd assume, and they don't really they wouldn't be able to like tell if it's real or not. They'd have to go to some expert. um like it basically, yeah, sorry, as long as the items are like functioning like properly. So like when Tegomi, like another example is when Tegomi like has the shootout, he's like very distinguished by the like 44 caliber Colt Army 1860 like revolver, one of the guns in the book. And no one besides like an expert armorer like recognized the gun like for its rarity and like uniqueness. Like as long as like the average person doesn't really know the difference between like a real and like genuine antique like item and like an excellent like counterfeit like or like a real thing. Like this theme of like a disillusionment about reality and misinterpretation is like woven into like every character's storyline like throughout the book.
So for The Handmaid's Tale, I'd say the message is to not be careful, because I feel like she's trying to warn us about something that could happen in the future, and because this is something I could see happening. I could see women winding up very oppressed and religion kind of taking over. So I feel like it's really just like a warning to be careful and to not let this happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a warning, but also similarly to Stella's author, a lot of people thought that Margaret Atwood was bashing on religion, and she wasn't. Like even though religion is the enemy here, the real message of the book was that legally controlling women's like reproductive freedoms is morally and politically wrong. So it's more about the freedom of like women and their choice to do what they want with their body rather than like religion. Second question. Who was the most interesting character in your novel and why?
So in The Man in the High Castle, my favorite character was Frank Frank. Frank Frank is like a skilled like maker of like knockoff historical items, like living in like the Pacific States of America. Like so at the start of the book, he's fired from his factory job as with like an argument with his boss, and then goes into business with Ed McCarthy and like making their own items. Like he's secretly Jewish, and he harbors like a fierce like dislike of the Nazis as well as like admiration for the Japanese. He's also like he was formerly married to Juliana Frank. Like Frank goes through like so many things throughout the novel. This being like persevering and not giving up in order to like accomplish like his goals at the end of the book.
That's really interesting. In my book, I think my the most interesting character would be Guy Montag, although Clarice and Faber are close seconds. And the reason for this is that his character develop he has like a lot of character development, and he goes from working for the government and doing everything he is told in the society full of propaganda, censorship, and surveillance to rebelling against it and attempting to escape a place that he once called his home. And the way he becomes more open-minded throughout the novel, um, to new things and ideas when talking to Clarice and Faber, the way he decides to risk everything to demonstrate to go and be with a few people who have memorized books and live in the forest in peace. So for some context, at the end of the book, he escapes to the forest, and then there's a few people there too, and they also escaped the society, and they just kind of live in the forest in peace, and they've memorized books, and they just like value like similar things. And so it's interesting because in a world where it would have been so much easier to just stick to what he knows and continue with his life, he felt compelled to find out what was missing from the lives of everyone around him and risk all the security and luxuries in his life.
I think that my most interesting character would probably be the commander. And it's just because it's interesting to see that he comes from like a total position of power, but he still has vulnerabilities. And I don't know, he just totally um, acted different than I thought he would when we were more introduced to his like character and his personality. He's just kind of a weird guy.
I would say for me, I was interested in the commander's wife. I feel like I would have liked to have more of her in the book. I felt really interesting how she was married to this really wealthy, successful guy, so she was kind of on top, but she still wasn't able to have kids for him, so she still kind of felt like she was lesser. And how we see like in before this world, she was sort of very successful and had it all from, but she still is in this world and kind of okay with it. But yeah, that's just kind of interesting.
All right, and third question. Do you believe that do you believe that other students should read this novel? Why or why not?
I think yes, other students should read this novel because I think it's a really pretty, like written novel. It's really well written, and I think it's a good kind of situation, like hypothetical situation. That's just kind of interesting to read about, and I just think it's a good book that you should read. Yeah.
So if you're interested in like history or find it like engrossing, then you might be interested in reading like The Man in the High Castle. But like for the generalized like population, I would suggest that you definitely should not read this book. Like it's a lot of slow parts. It's really not like too enjoyable. There isn't like too many big like heights points. It's like the only reason that I made it through the book was because I like found parts of it interesting, and I find like historical figures in like the 20th century like quite interesting. Um, this being that related to history, so like I was always curious to like what was going to happen next because it was like an alternate reality of like what actually happened. But as I said before, that the book was like very hard to follow at times, so I don't suggest that people with like a low attention span like read this book whatsoever. So
Yeah, that's fair. I think that generally I would recommend it to people just because it has some important themes and um, kind of explores a dystopian society and like the impact controlling leadership and like just censorship and everything has on people. And also, it's quite a quick read, and I would recommend it to people that like dystopian societies and are interested in reading about them, and also people that enjoy reading kind of poetic writing because there are a lot of metaphors and there's a lot of descriptive language. But I think once you like, if you enjoy that kind of thing, it would be a really good book.
I think that people should read my book if they appreciate good writing. It's definitely not a plot driven book, I would say. It's more written driven. So yeah, if you're looking at it from like an academic kind of point of view, this book is really great. And this is totally opposite of everyone, but I think the show is better personally. And if you want to know the story, maybe just watch the show instead of the book, unless you're reading it for its writing. Okay, fourth question. What lessons can we learn from the novel?
so like the one lesson that I kind of like took out of the book was like relationships that like we hold with each other. So like in The Man in the High Castle, when Mr. Tagomi killed like the SD guards for Mr. Baines, he decided to save him despite being on like different sides of like the war and like different countries. Like which risked like his like pristine career, like he could really be like exposed or whatever after this, he could lose his job and everything. So like a lesson that we learn from the novels, that it doesn't really matter like who you're helping, as long as like you're helping somebody that like you love or you care about or whatever, that you really like. So
I would say that a lesson from my book would be to kind of enjoy what you have because you don't know when it could get taken away. Like in the book, the main character, just goes into her job one day and is just told she can't work anymore and she can't have money anymore. And she kind of didn't realize how lucky she was to be able to do that because it got taken away like very quickly. So yeah, just kind of enjoy what you have because it could be gone at any moment.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think my book also kind of has that, but it's not that Guy Montag got his freedom taken away or that anyone got them taken away in the novel, but if you're reading it, you kind of think about, oh, like, I'm thankful to live in a society where this doesn't happen. And I think, like, one of the biggest lessons, another big lesson from the novel is to just, that it's important to stand up against controlling authority figures, and that sometimes questioning the world around us and challenging the rules that seem unfair, unethical is like how we can change our world. And also like the impact technology has on people, like it could be a tool, but it can also this is also like a warning sign, as I said, to just be mindful of how much we rely on it.
Yeah, and for my book, I think that it's the lesson we can take away from it is that if you're being treated unfairly, you should speak up. Because Offred, who's the main character, throughout the entire book, she kind of like shows us her missing her past, and she repeatedly focuses on the idea that like it's kind of too late and that she wants to take a risk, but she didn't do it soon enough. Like she envies the character Mora, because she got out, maybe. But yeah. Okay. Fifth question. What was enjoyable about the novel? What was not enjoyable about the novel?
I would say that what I didn't really enjoy was the flashbacks, just how many flashbacks there were. If you wanted to write the book in that past, start the book there and work your way up to where we are. Don't make it all flashbacks. But I did enjoy the writing style. I thought that was really pretty and just nice to read about. Yeah.
I exactly agree. I think that my favorite things were just the writing style and like the metaphors and how much thought you had to put in to really like get it kind of and get the metaphors that she was using because some of them were just like I don't know what other word to describe it with other than like beautiful. Like it was just such pretty writing. But yeah, I think that it was a bit slow. It got better, but as an entertaining book, it's not the most entertaining.
So for me in The Man in the High Castle, like what was enjoyable. So like I'm a type of person that's like pretty interested in like history. So I found the general idea of like the book to be pretty interesting or whatever when I first picked it up. It was cool to see like what it would be like if the Axis powers like be in Germany and Japan, like what they do with the world if they won the war. It was also pretty interesting to see like well-known figures such as like Hitler, Erwin Rommel, Winston Churchill, and like Roosevelt. And with Hitler and Roosevelt like getting assassinated, which is like pretty interesting, rather or with Hitler being pretty impactful in the world, and then Roosevelt being like a president, and him not being like a president in this book. However, like parts of the novel were not enjoyable. This being that like with the parallel narrative was added, this like made it like super confusing and hard to follow, and made me not really want to read it at some points through the book.
Okay, that's really interesting. In my book, I think that the writing was pretty enjoyable. It was confusing at first, but it was interesting to read, and also just the plot and like I like how quickly it moved because sometimes it was like I have a hard time concentrating on reading, but this was like a quick read and it was um, really it was pretty easy to read and follow along what was happening. And I like learning about the effect of the version of a dystopian society on people, and like how for people like Mildred felt despair and negative emotions, and she neglected them because it wasn't really acceptable in their society and stuff. And I think something that wasn't enjoyable about the novel, as I've said, like there was a lot of metaphors and like poetic, like 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 writing, and I think it was enjoyable towards the end, when I started to really appreciate it. But in the beginning, it wasn't that enjoyable.
All right, and final question. What were your expectations going into this novel and how did they change?
So for The Man in the High Castle, like my expectations going into the novel would that be the book be about like a different history relating to like World War II. Obviously, this being that the Axis powers, as I said before, Germany and Japan would win World War II. I thought it would be like a simple novel explaining like what happened from 1945 to like the end of the Cold War in 1990, and like the expectation like was thrown out the window and put into the trash can basically. As soon as as soon as I started reading the book, the first probably 5 to 10 pages, it would be like a um like I assumed it would be like a generalized like timeline of like basically what happened and not like specific characters. And like basically what happened is that it was like really in depth with like different timelines and different characters, so it made it pretty confusing.
For me, I've never watched the show, but I did see commercials for the show, so I kind of thought this book was like a Hunger Games, kind of like a revolution sort of thing, where she like was a handmaid, but then she decided to kind of rise up, and all the handmaids were. But it's not that. It was more. She was really quite not subservient, but she wasn't really speaking up or trying to change anything, and it wasn't what I expected it to be. But it wasn't bad. It was just different from what I expected.
Yeah, I think for my book as well, it was quite different, or not that different, but it definitely changed because based on the summary, I thought maybe citizens would still care about books or at least be neutral or open-minded at the thought of books, but actually, after all the propaganda about them, the people like really hated them. And like for example, one of the family members, like there's TVs like all over the walls in pretty much everyone's house, and it's just basically people they call family just talking. And Montag read a line, like a few lines of poetry, and and the family member literally cried. And then this was viewed as like an extremely bad thing because feeling emotion in any form was bad. So I thought it was interesting that um, I don't know. I guess I didn't expect the society to be so brainwashed and like it's different.
Yeah, interesting. My expectations going into this novel was that it would be pretty fast paced. I heard a lot about the show and like different scenes from the show, and was expecting to see those scenes in the book, but I didn't. And I'm not sure if they just added it to the show to make it more entertaining to watch, which would make a lot of sense. But yeah, so it changed by like 20 pages in. I realized that this book is like the first episode of the show, kind of. It's like the first episode just dragged out a lot, kind of. And
Yeah, I heard that like I kind of paid attention to the TV show and stuff too. I heard that it was a pretty good show, and I expected the book to be more like fast paced and everything. But that was like completely like shut down basically by one event happening in the entire book. That was sort of interesting. So
yeah, I thought it was going to be really good because the show is hyped up so much. And like, but oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay, thank you, Mr. Barrington.
bye.